Today we have a little known and hard to find gem from Bobby Fischer. This rare game is not even in the database I normally use, which is the chess-based database. It can be found on a couple of online databases, however, and this game was sent to me by one of our viewers, so thank you for this contribution. This game was played in 1970. His opponent is named Bachelor or Bachelor. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his name. Could be Bakier, I don't know. But the interesting thing about this is I think he's the real winner here because he got to play Bobby Fischer at the peak of his strength. In 1970, there is no doubt Bobby Fischer was the best player in the world. He was still 2 years away from winning the world championship, of course, in 1972, but he was clearly the best player in the world. To get to play him in a simultaneous exhibition in 1972, wow, that would really be an amazing experience. But let's jump right in. Fischer has white. His opponent has black. E4 from Bobby Fischer, no surprise. Black plays C5, knight F3, E6, D4, and very quickly we have an open Sicilian on the board, and A6 from black, or the Khan Sicilian. And basically, he looks to eventually advance this B pawn and this D pawn, and he plays a little slower, but one thing about this setup, it's very hard for white to attack it directly. Knight to C3 from Fischer, just natural play. Queen to C7 keeps the white's bishop out of C4 and also prevents white from playing E4, E5. Bishop to D3 clears the back rank so Fischer can castle, and maybe this bishop will find activity on this diagonal later. Knight F6 from black, putting some pressure on E4 and also supporting an eventual D5 push. Castle and B5. Black expands on the queen side. This pawn can go to B4 and unsettle this knight at C3, but also the bishop can develop at B7. Rook to E1 defends the pawn, but also prepares to go to E5 and gain space. Bishop to B7, attacking that pawn, and Fischer plays E5. Not only attacking the knight and gaining space, but increasing his control over this sensitive D6 square. So black plays knight to D5, Fischer exchanges it, and black retakes with the bishop. So in this position, we can see that white has an advantage. It's not a huge advantage, it's a slight advantage, but he has one. Because there's a lead in development, Fischer is castled, and black's king is still in the middle of the board. But there is one thing black has, and that is this bishop at D5. It's a really strong minor piece, controlling this now almost completely clear light square diagonal. So Fischer's going to have to deal with that. First he plays A4, a natural idea with these A6, B5 pawn structures, trying to just unsettle and create a weakness on the queen side. Black doesn't want white to just take twice and create a weakness on B5, so he goes ahead and plays B4. That does weaken the C4 square, however, so that's a little something that white could potentially exploit. But here Fischer, and there are a couple of moments in this game that are just so clear strategically. They make perfect sense. Here he just plays bishop to E4. He says, my opponent has one good piece, so I'm going to trade off that one good piece. Pretty logical. Now, the bishop does interfere with the rook's defense of E5, so black could take on E5 with the queen. However, that would lose immediately to this move, knight to F3, and the queen has nowhere to go. The bishop is attacked, so the queen would need to stay in contact with the bishop, but that doesn't help, because if the queen goes to H5, keeping a defending eye on the bishop, Fischer can still take it because of the pin on this E-file, and if he takes, then the queen could not be retaken. That's also true if the queen goes to D6. It's just the same story. So because of that, the bishops must come off, and black goes ahead and takes the white bishop on E4. Fischer recaptures. The rook is a little vulnerable here on E4, but it's also active and can be used to attack on the king side. Knight to C6 from black, attacking the E5 pawn twice, so Fischer adds a second defender to that pawn, and rook to C8. This C2 pawn is a little vulnerable. It's a backwards pawn, and it's a natural target for black's pieces, so he doubles up on the C-file to put pressure on that pawn. Fischer just plays rook to C1, defending the pawn. The queen goes to A7. I think here he wants to play bishop C5 and create some pressure down this diagonal. But here Fischer makes another clear strategic decision. He traded off that strong piece. Now he's got the one weakness, and what does he do? He gets rid of the one weakness. He just plays C3 and eliminates that weakness in his position. Pawn takes, rook takes. So now his pieces are fairly actively placed, right? And both of these rooks could potentially attack on the king side. Bishop to c5 from black, attacking this knight 3 times, but it's only defended twice. So Fischer goes ahead and plays bishop to e3, adding the third defender to that knight. So the best move here for black is probably this idea, knight to e7, with the idea of bringing the knight to d5. Now, Fischer is better, but it's not like it's the end of the game. He's just a bit better here. But what black does instead is play the most natural move on the board. He goes ahead and castles kingside. But that allows the first nice combination of the game. Fischer takes on c5 with his rook, a temporary exchange sacrifice. And what he's doing, he's drawing the queen to this c5 square. So when black takes the rook with the queen, as he does in the game, now this bishop is aiming at the queen with only this knight in the way. That means this knight can move and create a discovered attack against the queen. Knight takes e6. The knight attacks the rook at f8. The bishop attacks the queen. The knight also attacks the queen. So the queen has to move. The best choice is probably queen e7, but after knight takes rook, rook takes, Fischer is clearly better here. He has an extra pawn, a healthier pawn structure, and a 2-to-1 majority on the queen side. So he's definitely much stronger here. But black tries to mix it up, keep things a little sharper, and instead plays queen to a5. Now, Fischer could go ahead and just take that rook, and that would be good enough. But here he plays a very precise move, a move that modern computers show is the best move on the board. Even though this is a simultaneous and he was playing more than one player, he plays the very accurate b4 instead. Now notice this queen has nowhere to run. These two squares on d8 and c7 are controlled by the knight. The bishop controls b6. What that means is that the pawn has to be taken. Black has no choice here, so he has to take it. Takes with a knight, otherwise he would just lose his queen. Now Fischer takes the rook. And if black just retakes, Fischer would play this powerful idea, bishop to d2, piling up on the pinned knight. If black adds the rook to the defense, then just this, boom, queen to e1. And the knight is attacked 3 times, defended twice, and the piece would simply be lost here. So black has to do something else. So instead of retaking the knight, he plays knight to d5. So at least he can play knight to c3, forking the queen and the rook. Fischer not too worried about that. Plays knight takes d7, and black plays knight to c3, again with this fork of the rook and the queen. Now just a footnote here, modern computers do show us that knight to f6 check leads to a mate in 9. There are a lot of long variations, we won't look at it. But the move Fischer played is good enough. He plays the move queen to g4. And this is an extremely powerful idea. The threat, of course, is knight to f6 check, followed by queen takes rook, leading to mate. So he moves that rook to c6, and so now it's not under the queen's gaze, and also it can defend a little bit along black's third rank here, so it has some defensive purpose. But here Fischer plays the move knight to f6 check. Now in this position, if black goes ahead and takes the knight, then just queen to c8 is a back rank mate. He can block it once with his own queen. Then it's just mate. If he plays the king to f8, then queen to d7 is a strong idea. We'll look at that in a second. But king to h8 is played in the actual game. And here is Fischer's amazing move. I've kind of given it away a little bit, but I'll give you a second to see if you can find it. That's right. Boom. Queen takes g7 check. And believe it or not, in this position, his opponent resigned because it is a forced mate. Let's take a look at it. If king takes g7, then rook to g4 check, right? So the king can't go to h6 because the bishop at e3 controls that square. So it would be forced to go to h8 or f8. If the king goes to h8, then obviously rook to g8 is mate, right? If it goes to f8, however, then rook to g8 check, king to e7, boom, rook to e8 is mate. An important pattern to know because the pawn controls this one flight square here. Let's just say, however, what if he goes king to f8? Then Fischer, queen g7 still works, but then queen to d7 is decisive, attacking the rook and threatening queen to e8 mate, because the knight will control that square. Let's say rook takes knight. That doesn't make any difference because of this move that Fischer would have played, really strong. Bishop to c5 check, basically trying to draw the queen away from the d8 square. If the king just moves, then queen to e8 is mate, obviously. The only other legal move black has, because you can block with the rook, I guess, and delay that way, but just queen takes c5, then queen to d8 is mate, because the queen is no longer at a5, defending the d8 square. A brilliant attack, although I have to say I'd trade places with a bacular, even if it meant getting beat like this, because you got the privilege of playing Fischer at his absolute best. I hope you've enjoyed this game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.